أعوذ بالله من الشيطان الرجيم بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم الحمد لله رب العالمين الرحمن الرحيم مالك يوم الدين إياك نعبد وإياك نستعين اهدنا الصراط المستقيم صراط الذين أنعمت عليهم غير المغضوب عليهم ولا الضالين آمين. In the name of Allah, the most gracious, the most merciful. Dr. William Campbell, Dr. Zakir Naik, Dr. Mazakis, Dr. Jamal Badawi, Dr. Samuel Nauman, and Mr. Sam Shamoun. Distinguished guests, ladies and gentlemen, Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuhu. Peace and blessings of Almighty Allah be upon all of you. On behalf of the organizers, the Islamic Circle of North America, I, Sayyid Sabil Ahmed, welcome all of you to this unique event, a dialogue on the topic, the Quran, the Bible in the light of science. Again, on behalf of Dr. Campbell, Dr. Zakir Naik, Islamic Circle of North America, this dialogue is being held in a spirit of friendship, understanding each other's viewpoints. A brief introduction of ICNA's activities, Islamic Circle of North America. The goals of Islamic Circle of North America are to motivate Muslims to perform their duty of being witnesses unto mankind, offering educational, training opportunities to increase the Islamic knowledge and to enhance the character. ICNA is also active.
We are seriously after truth. There are no permissible lies. Here is an example of what I'm talking about. You can have the first slide here. This is talking about two dictionaries that I have in my home, one from 1951 and 1991. In these two dictionaries, the first meaning, pig, a young swine of either sex, is the same. The second meaning, any swine or hog, any wild or domestic swine, it's the same. Third, the flesh of swine, pork, is the same. Then the meaning, a person or animal of piggish habits, it's the same. A person who is gluttonous. And down here, pouring metal into a pig for pig iron is the same. But over here is a new meaning, a police officer. They call the police officers pigs. All right, the question is, in the Torah, it says you can't eat pigs. Well, can I turn around and say, oh yes, that means police officers, you can't eat police officers? Of course not. In the Quran, Allah says can't eat pigs. Can I translate it, can't eat police officers? No. It's wrong. It would be stupid. It would be lying, actually. Muhammad did not mean police officers. Moses did not mean police officers. We may not have any new meanings. We must use the meanings known in the 1st century AD for the Bible, or that is for the Gospel, and the 1st century of the Hijrah for the Quran. Now let us look at what the Quran says about embryology. Oh, sorry, got the wrong thing. It has been said that the idea of the embryo developing through stages is a modern one, and that the Quran is anticipating modern embryology by depicting differing stages. In a pamphlet entitled Highlights of Human Embryology by Keith Moore, Dr. Moore claims the realization that the embryo develops in stages in the uterus was not discussed or illustrated until the 15th century. We will weigh this claim by considering the meaning of the Arabic words used by the Quran, and secondly, by examining the historical situation leading up to and surrounding the Quran. We will start by looking at the main words using the word alaka, main verses. The Arabic word alaka in the singular or alaq as the collective plural is used 6 times. In the Surah of the Resurrection, Al-Qiyamah, 75, 35 to 39, we read, "Was he man, not a drop of sperm ejaculated? Then he became alaka, and God shaped and formed and made of him a pair, the male and the female." In the Surah of the Believer, Al-Mu'min, 40:67, it says, "He it is who created you from dust, then from a sperm drop, then from a leech-like clot, alaka, then brings you forth as a child, that perhaps you may understand." In the Surah of the Pilgrimage, Al-Hajj 22:5, it says, "O mankind, if you have doubt about the resurrection, consider that we have created you from dust, then from a drop of seed, then from a clot, alaka, then from a little lump of flesh, shapely and shapeless." And finally, the fullest treatment is in the Surah of the Believers, Al-Mu'minun, 23:12 to 14, which reads, "Verily, we created man from a product of wet earth, then placed him as a drop of seed in a safe lodging. Then we fashioned the drop a clot, alaka, and of the clot we fashioned a lump, and of the lump we fashioned bones, and we clothed the bones with meat. Then we produced it as another creation." And here you have the stages according to the Quran. Nutfa, sperm; alaka, clot; mudagha, piece of meat; adam, bones; and the 5th stage, dressing the bones with muscles. Over the last 100+ years, this word alaka has been translated as follows. There's 10 translations here. I'm not going to read them all. 3 are in French, where it says un gommot de sang, or a clot of blood. 5 versions are English, where it's either clot or leech-like clot. 1 version is in Indonesian, at the bottom there, Sigampal Dara, created man from alak. Here the word is in the collective plural. This form of the word can have other meanings, because alak is also the derived verbal noun of the verb alika. The verbal noun usually corresponds to the gerund in English, as in the sentence, "Swimming is fun." Therefore, we could expect it to mean hanging or clinging or adhering. But the 10 translators listed above have all used clot, or congealed blood, in this verse too. In spite of the number and qualifications of these translators who use the word clot, the French doctor Maurice Bucaille has sharp words for them. He writes, "What is more likely to mislead the inquiring reader is once again the problem of vocabulary. The majority of translations describe, for example, man's formation from a blood clot. A statement of this kind is totally unacceptable to scientists specializing in the field. This shows how great the importance of an association between linguistic and scientific knowledge is when it comes to grasping the meaning of Quranic statements on reproduction." Put in other words, Bucaille is saying, nobody has translated the Quran correctly until I, Dr. Bucaille, came along. How does Dr. Bucaille think that it should be translated? He proposes that instead of clot, the word alaka should be translated as something which clings, which would refer to the fetus being attached to the uterus through the placenta. But as all you ladies who've been pregnant know, the thing which clings doesn't stop its clinging to become chewed meat. It keeps on being the thing which clings, which is attached by the placenta for 8.5 months. Thirdly, these verses say that the chewed meat becomes bones, and then the bones are covered with muscle. They give the impression that first the skeleton is formed, and then it is clothed with flesh, and Dr. Bucaille knows perfectly well that this is not true. The muscles and the cartilage precursors of the bones start forming from the somite at the same time. At the end of the 8th week, there are only a few centers of ossification started, but the fetus is already able to make muscular movement. In a personal letter from Dr. T.W. Sadler, who's associate professor in anatomy and the author of Langman's Medical, as the bone models form, I want to go back to this. As the bone models form, Myoblasts develop a large muscle mass in each limb bud, separating into extensor and flexor muscles. In other words, the limb muscles develop simultaneously from the mesenchyme surrounding the developing bones. So there's the cartilage, and here are the muscles developing around the cartilage. During a personal conversation with Dr. Moore, I showed him Dr. Sadler's statement, and he agreed that it was absolutely valid. Conclusion: Dr. Sadler and Dr. Moore agreed. There is no time when calcified bones have been formed and then the muscles are placed around them. The muscles are there several weeks before there are calcified bones, rather than being added around previously formed bones as the Quran states. The Quran is in complete error here. The problems are far from being solved. Let us fully return to alaqa. Dr. Moore also has a suggestion. He says another verse in the Quran refers to the leech-like appearance and the chewed-like stages of human development. From this definition, Dr. Moore has gone ahead to propose that a 23-day embryo, 3 millimeters long, that's 1/8 of an inch. I can hardly put my fingers that close together without touching. This is Carnegie stage 10, shown on the inside cover of Moore's book. This is the beginning, and here's the sperm entering the egg. So that's stage 1. Comes down here to stage 6 in the 2nd week. And here is the 3rd week. And there's stage 10, and here is day 23. And this is what Dr. Moore wants to say looks like a leech. If we look further, though, and look at the X-ray, here's day 22, and the backbone is still open. And when we look at day 23, the backbone is open there, and it's open there, and the head is wide open. It doesn't look like a leech at all. And if you have doubt about the resurrection, consider. Therefore, the question must be asked. If it was a clear sign to the men and women of Mecca and Medina, what did they understand from the word alaqa, which would lead them to faith in the resurrection? The answer: we are going to examine the historical situation leading up to the time of Muhammad to see what Muhammad and his people believed about embryology. We will start with Hippocrates. According to the best evidence, he was born on the Greek island of Kos in 460 BC. And he has stages. His stages are as follows. The sperm is a product which comes from the whole body of each parent. Weak sperm coming from the weak parts, and strong sperm from the strong parts. Then he goes ahead and talks about the coagulation of the mother's blood. The seed, embryo, then is contained in a membrane. Moreover, it grows because of its mother's blood, which descends to the womb. For once a woman conceives, she ceases to menstruate. Then about flesh, he says at this stage, with the descent and coagulation of the mother's blood, flesh begins to be formed with the umbilicus. And lastly, bones, he says, as the flesh grows, it is formed into distinct members by breath. The bones grow hard and send out branches like a tree. Next, we will look at Aristotle. In his book on the generation of animals, sometime about 350 BC, he gives his stages of embryology. And he talks about first semen and menstrual blood, or catamenia. In this section, Aristotle speaks of the male semen as being in a pure state. It follows that what the female would contribute to the semen of the male would be material for the semen to work on. In other words, the semen clots the menstrual blood. Then he goes to flesh. He says nature forms this from the purest material, the flesh. And from the residue thereof it forms bones. And lastly, around the flesh, around the bones, and attached to them by thin fibrous bands, grow the fleshly parts. Clearly, the Quran follows this exactly. Sperm clotting the menstrual blood, which forms meat, then the bones are formed, And lastly, around about the bones grow the fleshly parts. Next, we will consider Indian medicine. The opinion of Charaka in 123 A.D. and Susruta is that both the male and female contributed seed. The secretion of the male is called the sukra, semen. The secretion of the woman is called artava or sanita, blood, and it is derived from the blood by way of food, by way of blood. Here we see that in the medicine of India, they too had the idea that the child was formed from semen and blood. Now we shall look at Galen. Galen was born in 131 A.D. in Pergamum, northern Bergama in Turkey. Galen says on semen, the substance from which the fetus is formed is not merely menstrual blood, as Aristotle maintained, but menstrual blood plus the two semens. The Quran agrees with Galen here when it says in Surah 76:2, we created man from a drop of mingled sperm. Now we'll look at the Galen stages. Galen also taught that the embryo developed in stages. The first is that in which the form of the semen prevails. The next stage is when it has been filled with blood, and heart and brain and liver are still unarticulated and unshaped. This is the period that Hippocrates called fetus. The Quranic Surah 22:5 reflects this saying. Then out of a morsel of flesh, partly formed and partly unformed. And now the third period of gestation has come. Nature caused flesh to grow on and around all the bones. We saw above that the Quran agrees with this in Surah 23:14, where it says, and we clothe the bones with meat. The fourth and final period is at the stage when all the parts in the limbs have been differentiated. Galen was so important, blood which provides the matter. Thus we see that Ibn Sina gave the female semen exactly the same role that Aristotle had assigned to the menstrual blood. It is difficult to overstate the importance of Ibn Sina as a scientific and philosophical authority for the pre-modern Europeans. Then we're going to look at Ibn Qayyim al-Jawziyah. Ibn Qayyim took full advantage of the agreement between Quranic revelation and Greek medicine. This is not very clear, probably, but the Hippocrates is in purplish, and the Quran is in bold type, green, and the Hadiths is in purple, and commentaries are in red, and his own thoughts in sort of a blue-green. So it starts out, he says, Hippocrates said in the 3rd chapter of Kitab al-Ajinnah, the semen is contained in a membrane, and it grows because of the blood of its mother, which descends to the womb. Some membranes are formed at the beginning, others after the 2nd month, and others in the 3rd month. And this phrase about the blood descending to the womb, we saw it when we looked at Hippocrates' slide. That is why God said, here the Quran is mentioned, He creates you in the womb of your mothers by one formation after another in 3 darknesses. That's Quran 39:6. Then He gives His own ideas. Since each of these membranes has its own darkness, when God mentioned the stages of creation and transformation from one state to another, He also mentioned the darknesses of the membranes. Most commentators explain, and here are the words of the commentators, it is the darkness of the belly, and the darkness of the womb, and the darkness of the placenta. In a second example, we read, Hippocrates said, the mouth opens up spontaneously, and the nose and ears are formed from the flesh. The ears are opened, and the eyes, which are filled with a clear liquid. The prophet used to say, I worship Him who made my face and formed it and opened my hearing and eyesight, and so forth. Here we look at Hippocrates again, and there in the 2nd stage is the same thing we just read. And made the sun as a lamp, siraj. The moon is called a light, Arabic nur, and the sun a lamp, siraj. Some Muslims claim that since the Quran uses different words, speaking about the light of the sun and the light of the moon, it reveals that the sun is a source of light, while the moon only reflects light. This claim is implied very strongly by Shabir Ali in his booklet Science in the Quran, and stated clearly by Dr. Zakir Naik in his video, is the Quran God's word, as you will now see clearly.
The light that we have, the light that we obtain from the moon, where does it come from? So he will tell me that previously we thought that the light of the moon was its own light. But today, after science has advanced, we have come to know that the light of the moon is not its own light, but it's a reflected light of the sun. I will ask him a question. That it is mentioned in this Quran, in Surah Al-Furqan, chapter number 25, verse number 61. Blessed is he who has created the constellation and placed therein a lamp and a moon, which has reflected light. The Arabic word for moon is qamar. And the light described there is munir, which is borrowed light, or nur, which is a reflection of light. The Quran mentions that the light of the moon is reflected light. You say you discovered it today. How come it's mentioned in the Quran 1400 years ago? He will pause for a time. He won't reply immediately. And then may say, maybe it's a fluke. I don't argue with him. For sake.
Near the end of the video, we heard Dr. Naik explain the Arabic word for moon is qamar, and the light described there is munir, which is borrowed light, or nur, which is a reflection of light. Please do not forget what he said. Root. The word munir is used 6 times in the Quran. 4 times, Surahs Al-Imran 3:184, Al-Hajj 22:8, Luqman 31:20, and Fatir 35:35. It is the phrase Kitab al-Munir, which Yusuf Ali translate as a book of enlightenment, and Pickthall uses the scripture-giving light. Clearly, this indicates a book which is radiating the light of knowledge. Nothing about reflection. Nur. It says in Surah Noah 71:16 and Yunus 10:5 that Allah made the moon a light. Thus we find that the Quran says that the moon is a light, and it never says that the moon reflects light. Moreover, in other verses, the Quran says that Allah is a nur, a light. Surah An-Nur 24:35, one of the most beautiful passages in the Quran, reads, Allah is the light, nur of the heavens and the earth. The parable of his light is as if there was a niche, and within it a lamp, the lamp enclosed in glass, the glass as it were a brilliant star, and so forth. Thus we see that the word nur is used for both the moon and Allah. Are we going to say that Allah gives off reflected light? I think not. But if you continue to insist that nur, used for the moon, means borrowed or reflected light, and we saw above that Allah is the light, nur of the heavens and the earth, what is the source of this light? Siraj, of which Allah is only a reflection. Think about it. If Allah is named nur or reflected light, who or what is the Siraj? Well, the Quran tells us who the Siraj is. But the answer will shock you. In Surah Al-Ahzab 33, 45, 46, we find, O Prophet, truly we have sent thee as a witness, a bearer of glad tidings and a warner, and as a lamp spreading light. Here it says that Muhammad is the lamp spreading light. In Arabic, it is wasirajan muniran. Linguistically and spiritually, this is the end of the discussion. Linguistically, siraj and the adjective munir are used together for the same shining thing, the person Muhammad. It's clear munir does not mean reflected light in this verse that you can see. and has cast Elka onto the earth firm mountains, Rawasiya, lest it should shake with you. In the prophets, El Anbiya 21:31, as one of 7 warnings, we read, and we have set on the earth firm mountains, lest it should shake with you, with them. Finally, in the B, Nahl 16:15 says, and he has cast Elka onto the earth firm mountains, Rawasiya, lest it should shake with you. We see then that the believers and unbelievers are told that Allah has done this great thing. He's thrown down and placed the mountains so that the earth will not shake violently with them. Therefore, we must ask ourselves, what did they understand? In the next 2 verses, another picture is given. The news, Anaba 78:6-7. Have we not made the earth an expanse and the mountains as stakes, El Jibala Otadan, as those used to anchor a tent in the ground? And then the overwhelming, El Ghashiyah 88:17-19. Do they, the unbelievers, not look at the mountains, El Jibal, how they've been pitched like a tent? Here men are told that the mountains are placed as tent pegs. Tent pegs keep the tent stable. So again, the idea is put forward that the pegs, the mountains, will keep the earth from shaking. A third picture is presented in the word Rawasiya, used for mountains. This word comes from the Arabic root arsa, and the same root is used for the Arabic word for anchor. To throw out or cast the anchor is Elqa al-Mirsa. So instead of cast the anchor to keep the ship from moving, we have cast the mountains to keep the earth from shaking. From these pictures, it is clear that Muhammad's followers understood that the mountains were thrown down like tent pegs to keep a tent in place, like an anchor to hold a ship in place, to stop the earth from moving, i.e. limit earthquakes. But in fact, this is false. The forming of mountains causes earthquakes. Therefore, these verses present a definite problem. Dr. Maurice Bukai recognized this and discussed them in his book, The Bible, the Quran, and Science. After quoting the above verses about mountains, he says, modern geologists describe the folds in the earth. Therefore, on occasion, pressure builds up under the plug, and the volcano explodes, as happened in the South Pacific at Krakatoa in 1883, when the whole island was blown away. And it happened in Mount St. Helena in our days, when the mountain was blown away. We can conclude from this information that mountains were formed originally with movement and shaking, and that now, in the present, earthquakes are caused by their continued formation. When the plates buckle over each other, there are earthquakes. When the volcanoes erupt, there can be earthquakes. However, it is clear that the followers of Muhammad were understanding these verses to say that Allah threw the mountains down as tent pegs or anchors to keep the earth from shaking. Throwing the mountains down into the earth may be poetry, but to say that mountains keep the earth from shaking is a severe difficulty, which is out of step with modern science. Now we're going to take a little look at what the sun says about the Quran says about the sun. In the Surah of the Kahf, 1666, we pour out to you from what is within their abdomen, the cattle's abdomen, between excretions and blood, milk, pure and agreeable to the drinkers. The abdomen where the intestines are, in 20th century medical science, the abdomen where intestines are is where the intestines are. The mammary glands are under the skin. In humans, they're under the skin here. In cattle, they're under the skin between the legs. No connection. There's no connection between the breasts and the intestines and their feces in any way. Feces, though in the body, it really is outside of the animal. Animal's finished with it. It's not connected to milk or to anything else. And finally, we're going to look at communities. The Surah of the Cattle, Al-An'am, 638, there is not an animal on the earth, nor a being that flies on 2 wings, but forms communities like you. Speaks about no animal on earth, not a being that flies, And then it says that every one of them is communities like you, and I assume that the Quran is speaking about we humans. Well, in some spiders, when they finish mating, the mother eats the father. Well, I'm glad that my wife didn't eat me. Even in bees, the extra male drones are thrown out to die. Well, I'm glad also that after we had 4 children, that my wife didn't push me out of the house, too. Finally, the lions. When a lion gets old, a male lion gets old, a young lion comes along and drives him away from his own wives. And the young lion takes over the wives. But what he does with the cubs of the old lion, he kills them all. So I do not think that this sentence is true. All of the communities and all of the animals do not live in communities like us. In conclusion, it is clear that the Quran has many scientific errors. As a generality, the Quran mirrors and reflects the science of its time. The science